What I've done is taken some things from research, and I want to see and help you kind of understand how to think about statistics, which is a pretty important concept within criminal justice. And I'm just kind of getting you introduced to this so that this when you transfer, you get into another class, you won't have to experience it for the first time. So I'm starting with probably one of the hardest ones, which is just to get you to start thinking about how to use statistics in making conclusions. So I've got some instructions here on the bottom. You're going to mark where the numbers would go from the left column with the green and yellow and white colors, and you're going to put those into the table. So let's say you printed this out, or maybe you just wanted to try to do it with your head. I'll give you a hint. The highest numbers would go in the top 10% column all the way to the right, and the lowest would go in the bottom 10% to the left. Now keep in mind that these percentages, 10, 15, 50, 15, and 10, those are of total students, so not of the numbers themselves, but of the students. However, the numbers represent a student. So each student, this is their grade in the course. This is from a previous course of students who volunteered to participate in this activity. And so you want to think about 10% of the students, right? The total number of the students. They would go in the right-hand column. Just to help you now understand what this is. This is for classes that grade on a curve. So many of your classes grade on a curve. This class does not. You're going to be doing self-grading. But for classes in which you're on a curve and you felt like you did well, you felt like you completed the assignments, what you don't realize in those classes is that you're competing with other students. So only 10% of the total number of students can get an A, right? So that would be that far right-hand column. Only 15% of the remaining students then could get a B. So this is why the majority of students get a C, and you're still meeting expectations. You're doing the work, but you just aren't meeting the level that the professor had indicated on this bell curve. This is grossly unfair. I'm thinking many of you are probably thinking that. So one of the justifications for doing this is that this roughly replicates what employers expect to see in the workplace. So most people will meet the expectations, but some people will exceed them, and then some people will be below those expectations. I think this is kind of nonsense, but again, it's very common in many of your classes, and so I just wanted you to get into the habit of, what would the A students, what is their score? How different is that from the C students? And you'll see it's not a significant difference, but it is a little bit of one. So that's what you do just to kind of get used to using statistics and then to see why they matter. The next one I want to show you is the text I give you is there's this a pattern here that you see. It's inclining, it's going up. And these are all shooting deaths in 2018, and the red line represents all of the deaths, and then the yellow line represents suicides. And so the question, as you do the do this assignment annotation, you're going to ask, or you're going to answer, which are more common, homicides or suicides. And so you want to look at this graph very carefully, because this might challenge many of your assumptions. Same thing with when you start thinking about what's the most common criminal activity. Look at this chart very carefully, and then in your annotations you're going to answer this question, and then try to show how much more is the most common crime by the least common crime. The next one I'm asking you just to really process this information. Isn't it clear from this bar graph that crime is dropping very seriously, significantly, in both New York and Chicago? So you want to look at that and see, what was life like when it was at the peak, and what's going on now that it's flattened out. The same thing is with why are detectives having a harder and harder time solving homicide crimes, right? So as the murder rate is declining, you also have detectives aren't closing cases, they're not clearing their cases, and so you want to see what might explain that. What do you think is going on there? Next one is kind of a fun one, I think, is what's going on with the obsession that we have with true crime and related shows on TV, and what does that have to do with where serial killers actually live? Think about where those shows take place. and then think about what does it say about those cultures in those areas that there's so much activity and so much interest. Does media relate to reality, or is it the other way around, or is there something else going on? And then finally, I like to think about two things. One is, why do killers use guns instead of poisons, cars, drugs, and fire, and try to see how much more they use it. And then think about this kind of another myth that comes out in popular culture is that criminal activity is mostly among the poor, especially violent criminal activity. Historically, that hasn't been true, right? So for thousands of years, it's actually been the wealthy that tend to commit crimes, and when you profile a serial killer, they tend to be middle class or wealthy males. So why is the distinction between the media and reality so sharp? Why is it so false, right? Why don't they have TV shows that represent the typical serial killer, like a Dexter, right? That show would be much more accurate than most of the pop culture myths. And think about when this shift occurred. Popular culture up until the Industrial Revolution used to have bad guys who were rich people. So the classic case is Sherlock Holmes, where Professor Moriarty is from the upper class. And Sherlock Holmes actually uses people from the lower and middle classes constantly to help him solve these crimes. And so the good guys are the poor and the working classes. Whereas that shifts after the Industrial Revolution, and the stories start saying that the poor are the bad guys and the rich are the good guys. And then obviously that changes again with superheroes, kind of getting even more ridiculous and far away from reality. So you want to think about kind of these myths and how these statistics confront those. And that's really just what I wanted you to think about as you're doing this particular annotation assignment.